Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben Matlock.
And I think this is the energy level I'm going to bring tonight. Just the
soulful sounds of random trivia from the internet.
I call it business meeting you don't really want to be at, but have to participate in anyway.
So just curl up by the fire and let us soothe you with a bunch of dumb ranker-level factoids. No, I'm kind of...
It is so hard to find. It's getting harder and harder to find topics that aren't those, like, ranker or, like, listable or whatever the fuck all those, like, top 47 things that people have put cheese on lists.
That'd be a good episode, though. I'll just talk about the shit we can cook with cheese.
And the number one thing you can put cheese on is more cheese.
Try topping a grilled cheese sandwich with some cheese, and you can have a grilled cheese. But yeah, no, I'm kind of low level today. I just, like I my day off was yesterday, and I went into work because they needed a little more help, and it was one of those days where it's just like, oh well, I'll only be there for a couple hours, and then it turned into like basically a full shift.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, all right, I'm tired.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that it sucks is then when, like, considering the week, everybody looks at it like, well, you had your day off. It's like, well, you came in for a little bit. And you're like, I came in for a whole shift.
Yes. But, I mean, it was fine. And the paycheck will be nice. But it's that level of, like, tired where it's like, I'm less excited about starting the show than I am that, like, we do like a countdown when we start 1, 2, 3, and I'm just so stoked that 3 landed exactly on 3 on my timeline here on the audio file. So I'm just like captivated by that. Like, wow, yeah. Even if the rest of the show is a dud, that start is perfect to sync up. We're professional as fuck.
I don't think it'll be a dud. I think I kind of like the topic I came across for this week, which...
Cool.
I said on Twitter, if you follow me, it's always kind of a surprise to me when I actually get notes together. It's like the one thing you have to do, and you do it, and then you're like, wow, I did the thing I'm supposed to do. Like, it's just a relief that it wasn't the week that it all falls apart.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. I'll let you take the wheel, and I'm going to go take a nap. So, no. But yeah, last week we talked about the what they have going down in Australia as far as mythology. So now I assume today will be something wildly different from that.
Yes. That's what I was going to say. This one falls squarely in our wheelhouse, but I can say that about every show because we don't have a wheelhouse. That's like kind of was our one like rule of the show when we decided to bring it back in this format was that just like anything goes.
Under no circumstances can we have a forte. People cannot associate like us getting like quality material on one topic on this show.
And if there's anything we're good at, it's being not good at anything in particular. I mean, we nail it. So we've done a number of stories on witches, and they usually go something like this. A woman, or a man, but usually a woman, who is a little different than, like, the people around her, gets singled out and murdered because obviously she's the cause of everything bad that has and will happen. Like,
and like in the old days, it was like the most trivial fucking shit, where it was like, oh, the fucking goat didn't give us like another half gallon of milk. Kill the witch.
Betsy parts her hair on the left and all the other women are on the right. Bride of Satan. Get her.
I got drunk and pissed my pants. It must have been that witch.
Right. It's like, Jim, you do that every Saturday. You're all witches.
That means the witch keeps doing it and no one will stop her.
Well, but see, that's even wrong because in your scenario, Jim took responsibility. He said, I got drunk and pissed my pants. It would be, the witch got me drunk and she pissed my pants.
My God, the witch put piss in my pants.
Right. So, but we've done a number of those stories, and some of them have been like legend or lore or whatever that are probably based on real events, and some have been actual real historical like tellings. We've also done a ton of stories on mass murderers and serial killers. I just thought I'd point out those two trends for no particular reason.
Just for the case file when they're like, these two podcast hosts have a fucking problem. They see witches and serial killers everywhere.
So Matthew Hopkins was born in England sometime around 1620. And literally every article I found on Hopkins included the line, like word for word, "Little is known about Matthew Hopkins before 1644. Including the Wikipedia entry on him, which says that sentence, and then immediately goes on to talk about Hopkins' family life prior to 1644. So I thought that was a little weird. It's like, little is known about this guy, so here, let's talk about him before this event. Although technically it says little is known, not nothing is known about him. Matthew had 5 other siblings. His father was James Hopkins. James was a vicar of St. John's in Suffolk. James, his father, died in 1634, so that would have made Matthew about 14 years old. So, in the early 1640s, Matthew took his inheritance and moved to Manningtree in Essex, where he'd buy an inn and establish himself as a gentleman. So, like, as I understand it, like in this context, a gentleman meant somebody of good countenance and standing within the community. We both know in 1600s, and even today, really, it more accurately means a landowning or like a property owner who is white and male, regardless of how like they're. Yeah, it doesn't matter how they actually behave.
The 1700s definition of good guy.
He beats orphaned puppies in the streets, but he owns a house. So
wow,
gentleman. Matthew Hopkins didn't do much of historical note until the year 1644. But before we get to that, let's jump to the thing that our listeners look forward to most, which is obviously quick and dirty and often wrong tangential history lessons. So in 1642, about 2 years prior to Matthew gaining notoriety, the English Civil War broke out. This, of course, was the conflict between the Roundheads and the Cavaliers, who both wanted different government things.
Needless to say, Roundheads is not as cool of a name as Cavaliers.
Exactly. That's kind of what I was trying to, like, I could have actually done so, I should know something about the English Civil War from history class, but who pays attention to that crap?
The famous clash between the Golden Knights and the Jackoffs.
I like to picture, it was a civil war. They both just wanted different things for their country. And I like to think like the Cavaliers just wanted like more equal representation in Parliament, and the Roundheads just wanted to not be called Roundheads.
Fuck you. We can't. There's no way we can have an equal opportunity system and not call you Roundheads. It just can't be done. You need to get over it. This is called democracy, okay? Like,
and I say it makes me wonder, as if you can't look any of this up and nobody knows, but like Roundheads, do you think that was like the derogatory name given to them, and thus like the Cavaliers, like, how history is written by the victors? Somebody
scratched out like what their actual name was, and it's just when the Cavaliers
Roundheads
took out the fuckheads.
Or do you think the Roundheads was their chosen, like the one side is like, we're the Cavaliers, and the other side's like, some just jackass shouted out, Roundheads! And they're like, fuck, now we're stuck with it. Thanks a lot, Bill.
Or it was just like one of those like ultimate coincidences where it's like, I mean, like, it's not great, but have you noticed we all have perfectly spherical heads? Or
they were just like led by Henry Roundhead of the Roundhead clan, like
who his fucking basketball dome everybody had to remark on.
Or did they have normally round shaped heads, but the Cavaliers had these weird ass angular heads? Like, maybe they were like Steve from Minecraft with boxes on their heads.
But somehow it got flipped, so they're the fucking weird ones.
Weirdos, yeah.
They had the most normal heads of anyone in town, and that It's like the fucking star-bellied Sneetches thing from Dr. Seuss.
The real shame is nobody talks about the spindly fingers, who were also a part of the conflict, but they just didn't last very long. Anyway, right. So that was going on. But this period also overlapped with the end of the 30 Years' War, which everyone knows was the war in Europe, like with everyone in Europe fighting everybody else in Europe because reasons.
It was a time where the Roundheads were fighting Cavaliers, so everyone was fighting everyone.
You can the whole setup here is you can imagine a country in which you're in a civil war, but also involved in an international war. Right. Like, just not a great period of time for peace and
it sounds
lawfulness.
Cool. We should go there.
Well, I think we're headed there, but that's not the point. So now that we're ready to ace that geopolitical history exam, we can get back to Matthew Hopkins. Hopkins became famous, as I said, in 1644. I always write 1944 because in my head there's no other centuries to talk about.
Became big in 1984 by George Orwell.
So in the midst of all this violent turmoil, when he suddenly appointed himself the title Witchfinder General,
awesome,
and began telling people that he was an...
Oh, man, that's awesome.
Yep, and he began going around telling people he was an official witch hunter from London's Witchfinder General's office.
Like, the only reason he could get away with it, and it's I know it's going to go to, like, terrible places, but modern day comparison, story, it would be like me walking out of my house one day saying I'm a witcher. Yeah.
Right.
Putting like cat
then making up like the most
contacts in my eyeball and then just like dyeing my hair white and just
deciding. Giving it like the dorkiest fucking name, like I'm Ben from the Bureau of Witch Identification and I don't know. Something.
From Witch Hunter General. It just sounds like a fucking MASH sitcom spinoff.
So, yeah, he said he was Witchfinder General from the Witchfinder General's office in London, which of course was not a real office. And no, nobody seemed to care that was not a real office. I like to also think he made up like a fake badge and ID card and flashed it at people like Mulder and X-Files.
I mean, what is an office? What's really a business? Like, when you think about it, like, I need the government to tell me it's a business before I can make business cards and tell them
Maybe that's why it's Witchfinder General, is because when people ask, well, where's that office? They're like, that general vicinity. It's like, you never have to give them.
The great thing about Witchfinders is we're in the general area at all times.
If you called yourself a Witchfinder specific office, then you get screwed because it doesn't, pan out.
I fucking love, like, and I mean, it's true today, though, too, where it's like guys will just decide, you know what, I'm not actually a failure. I'm in charge of, I'm a werewolf hunter,
Right. I mean, that's why there's such thing as like a Bigfootologist or something. It's like, that's not a real science.
But
if you believe hard enough and do it long enough, it will become a thing.
Yeah.
Which we've joked about before was literally 100% my approach to games journalism when we were writing about video games.
Hey, once I got a review code, it counted. Okay.
Yeah, right. So, Witchfinder General Matthew got his start when he said he had overheard some women talking about all the deals that they had made with Satan. That's seriously his witch hunter origin story, is overhearing witches.
You know what? I respect it, because everyone else would come up with some traumatic backstory or whatever. Is like, no, I just heard some chicks at a bar talking about the devil. So I better narc on that.
But instead of turning him in, I decided, hey, I'm a witch finder. I'll take care of this.
You know what I always wanted to do? Use a crossbow on some unsuspecting ladies.
Which way to the semen? Ah! He shoots her.
It's okay. I'm not a fucking maniac at all. I'm a witch hunter master general.
So along with his partner, John Stern, whose official title alternated between witch hunter, and witch pricker.
Witch
Hopkins,
pricker? That's a witch fucker.
Right.
That's not...
And it sounds like a derogatory form of it, too. Not like, oh, good job. It's like, you witch pricker.
It sounds like you're really bad at fucking witches, actually. Like, a witch pricker is not... Like
it's not a good thing, yeah.
Yeah, he's not a good leg.
You don't puff out your chest when you're called that.
Yeah.
So his initial investigation of the loud-talking witches coven would lead to accusations of witchcraft against 23 women. Fortunately for these women, England had already been through centuries of this witch trial crap, and after the Lancaster witch trials, which we all know took place from 1612 through 1634...
Of course.
The English government had made it a requirement to have actual material proof that somebody was a witch before they could be found guilty of witchcraft. So they had actually stepped in because they've been through this hysteria before, and they're like, no. Wait, we need to put some actual procedure in place.
It needs to be more than you just shit and threw up at the same time, Barnum. You can't just say a witch did it to you.
Which part of me wants to give him credit for. But then the other part of me is reminded of this, that when you're required to present material proof of a completely made-up thing like being a satanic witch, that material proof tends to also be completely made up. Yeah. It's like we talked about with the silver bullets and werewolves. It's like, why is that a thing? It just is.
Yeah. If I shoot you with a silver bullet, it proves you're a werewolf.
Right. To make matters worse, the regional courts that were supposed to be responsible for hearing such serious charges, and that's not a sarcastic phrase like most of my phrases, at this point, being found guilty of being a witch was still an automatic execution, it was a capital offense. So, something that serious was supposed to be tried by these regional courts, but they were all very busy with this war and rebellion crap going on. So the witch hunter general's cases would instead be heard by the much lower, justice of the peace, the local judges.
And if you've ever scratched your head in puzzlement at some high-ranking judges, imagine what you get when you get the local cream of the crop.
Right. Especially at a period like this when you're in turmoil, because any of the local ones that were worth any of their salt would have been moved up to be doing important stuff. So these were well, yeah, he tries to put his shoes on his hands, but he's got a robe, so I guess we'll make him a judge.
Can't find his gavel, so he uses his head.
Guilty, ow!
Damn. And add a salt to it.
Got a headache again. Anyway, of the 23 women that Hopkins initially accused, 4 of them would die in prison before making it to trial, and the remaining 19 would be found guilty and hanged. So to put that in perspective...
Say what you will, man's good at his job.
His job. That's how he marketed himself, literally.
I've put 23 witches out of commission.
To put that in some perspective, at least for us Americans... There's 19 women found guilty and hanged is the exact same amount of people that were found guilty of witchcraft and killed during the entirety of the Salem witch trials.
Wow.
Plus,
so one dude matched it.
Right. And that's not counting the 4 that died before they even got a hearing, which would have pretty well definitely been found guilty and hung.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because you hear 19 people, and of course 19 people dying, it's like, oh, that's bad. And you're like, yeah, that was the whole, over here, the Salem witch trials, every person knows about, or relatively every, because it was such an awful event that took place over, it was only like a year and a half, 2-year time, but it was like this entire town going stupid. And this one guy matched it with his first, I overheard these witches talking.
Yeah. Again, great way to start your small business.
Right, right. All the Silicon Valley, big shots were jumping on the stock options at that point. Like, this guy knows what he's doing. But in order to live up to his self-appointed... you can't be a witch hunter, though, if you just simply, overhear some witches. I think that only makes you a witch eavesdropper or maybe like a witch voyeur, but you're certainly not hunting them down.
A witch creeper, which was probably more likely.
Exactly. Well, I mean, I just happened to be spying into the women's restroom, and they said that they were a witch.
It's coincidentally, all 23 of these witches wouldn't go out with me.
Despite my standing as a gentleman. So in order to live up to the title Witch Hunter, he would have to take the show on the road. So Hopkins and Stern and a handful of women who served as witch prickers, there it is again, went from town to town offering their services for a mere 20 shillings, which is about $2,700 in today's money.
Holy shit.
Right. So you basically just walk up to a town and say, hey, give us $2,700 and we'll find us some witches.
They get into your foundation, they erode the wood. I'm telling you, they're not obvious to the naked eye. We know how to find them.
There's some evidence that they also charged a finder's fee, which basically meant for, $2,700 to hunt the witches. But then for each witch that they found, they'd get paid, up to $2,700 again per person, which is the very, very best way to make sure you're getting a good, honest legal investigation is to pay per conviction.
Yeah.
And
I'm sure they're not at all I'm sure they went to a town and hey, no witches here. We'll just take that initial fee and be on our way.
Yeah. No, don't even worry about the deposit. We didn't find any. You're good. Just we'll call it even. In fact, I didn't put this in my notes, but I came across it in one of the articles that'll be linked in the citations. But there's even some evidence that one of these towns paid for their services so often that they ended up having to pass a special tax because they ran out of money to pay this guy.
Holy fucking shit. What a...
But he's doing this to, for the upstanding, religious moral.
What an amazing piece of shit. Because I was joking, but he seriously found a way to this combines everything we do on this show of
I know. I knew you'd love it.
Of supernatural history tragedy merged with a fucking con man. This guy is peak non-essential podcast material.
And we've talked, it makes you, because we'll never be able to go back and prove, there is a chance that this guy was just because people were really, really into this religious anti-Satan witch thing. Maybe he really thought he was hunting witches, but my guess, if I had to bet everything on one way or the other, it'd say he knew that they weren't witches. He just wanted the fucking money.
Well, I mean, and anytime we've done a con man story, we talk about how if they don't start this way, they ultimately get to a point where they are completely buying their own bullshit. That's how they can sell the lie so well, is they've done it so long, they make themselves believe it. So I'm sure that guy could be dragged to his fucking grave yelling that he was doing the right thing and that they were actually witches. Even if deep down or initially it was totally just a fucking scam.
Yeah. So you may be wondering how does one find and prosecute a witch in an era where good, honest witch hunters are unfairly shackled by arbitrary legal requirements like having the actual burden of material proof of your claims? And I'm glad you asked. Fortunately, Witchfinder General Matthew Hopkins was an expert when it came to identifying witches beyond a shadow of a legal doubt.
If they drink water, they're witches.
You're getting close. The very first thing, one fact that everybody knows about witches is that they're actually rejected by water. Because obviously when you enter into covenant with the Dark One himself, that's like an anti-baptism. And because baptisms happen in water, and you did the opposite of a baptism, now water rejects you. Science. So what does that even mean? It means you float, of course. And I know you saw where this was going.
Jesus Christ.
So for the record, I guess this makes me like a super witch because I float like I'm a damn styrofoam cup. I think you could load me down with rocks and I would still float because
I didn't realize that, like, back then every family would see, like, a family of ducks in a pond and, like, look on in horror.
Well, it's funny because, and it's not like this is, most people have kind of heard about this kind of method before. It's famously lampooned in Holy Grail, Monty Python's Holy Grail, but it's that exact thing. In order to scientifically test it, Hopkins would first have to tie the accused person up and then also stuff her into a bag. I'm going to say her because witches, yeah, they can be male or female, but it sounds like basically 100% of the witches that he would find were female. I'm sure that was just, coincidental and not that he...
Yeah. It might shock you that historically a horrible thing was targeting women.
Women, right. So he'd tie him up, but then he'd also stuff them into a big sack, which would also be tied up. Then it was a simple matter of tossing that bag into a body of water and seeing if she floats. If she doesn't float, he promised to have one of his associates fish her out before she drowned. Or more accurately, he promised to try to get her out before she drowned. We're not always successful at that attempt. Well, this method was the most sure, and it's funny too because they never, at least none of the articles I got into specifically got into this, but it's like, oh, you tie them up, but then you have to put them into a bag and tie it tightly, which depending on the material would hold air and help them float. But witchcraft. So anyway, this was the most surefire way to discover witches. But the government found out what Hopkins was up to, and they quickly ordered him to politely knock it off. He was told that, like, the only way he would be allowed to scientifically test a potential witch's water rejection coefficient. I made these terms up because it needs to be sciencey. This is obviously clear cut,
Yeah.
It's how the world works. But in order to do this test, he could do it, but he'd first have to obtain a person's permission. And of course, nobody in their right mind would agree to that test because it's being murdered.
Oh, then what do you have to hide? Ha ha ha.
I should also mention that by this point, English law had not only added that requirement for material proof before you could convict somebody of witchcraft, but they also forbade the use of torture in obtaining confessions. But I'm kind of curious what their definition of torture was, given the relatively mild reprimand of Hopkins' water method.
Seriously,
hey now, that's kind of that's on the line here, dude.
Like in your quest to get material evidence, I'm pretty sure you're not allowed to murder someone while you're trying to get that. And their response
wasn't like, we're going to charge you with murder because that was clearly against the law. It was like, hey, let's cool it with the water stuff. You can keep these investigations going. Just don't throw them in the water in a sack. How about we?
And so also, why do you need a drownable body of water to prove, if someone can float?
Well, that's
or not?
What I was thinking. If water rejects them, couldn't you just pour water on them and see if it bounces off?
It's like a Gatorade commercial. It's just
right. Or does water only mildly reject? The water's like, ew, I don't like this person.
As you can see, when we splash this bucket of water on her, her hair's still completely dry. She's made of Flex Seal.
Maybe she's a witch. Maybe it's Maybelline. I don't know. So if you can't drown a witch and you can't torture a witch, what can you do? Well, fortunately, it's also a well-known scientific fact that everyone who is in league with Satan carries the mark of the devil, and the Witchfinder General was just a brave sort of man who was willing to carefully inspect any woman accused of witchcraft, no matter how unpleasant it must have been for him to force them to get naked for him.
There have been worse people in terms of, degree of, the horrible shit they've done that we've talked about on this show. But this guy is just the total package of just a fucking monster.
He's going to end up there. But, so birthmarks, moles, freckles, abnormalities such as third nipples, and even suspicious bruises could all be the mark of the devil. Which is really fun if you think about it. Right. It's a completely, totally not made up rule of witchism that everyone who is a witch has a mark of a devil. But the mark of the devil isn't the same thing. It could be...
Yeah,
it's like,
then
wait,
it's not the mark of the devil. You're just those are just marks.
The mark, right?
Yeah. Who's looking at this fucking guy? I'm sure he's got some weird fucking growth on him or something.
Right. I mean, bodies are gross. I think all of us have something that's like, hey, like, especially if you're going to count like moles. Like,
yeah.
Anyway. So if accused, Hopkins, Stern, and company, the witch prickers, would force the accused woman to shave all her body hair so that they could make sure there were no hidden marks. But the devil and his witches are sneaky. Hopkins knew that even if one could not see a devil's mark, that didn't mean there wasn't one there, because, of course, some devil's marks are actually invisible. So
what?
You've already included a blanket of anything unusual could be a mark, and then you're saying, well, shit, we still can't find it.
Why are we even making up these rules then?
We're not. It's science, Ben. It's scientific facts.
You can't fucking say, like, well, you'll prove it's a witch if they have a marking. Oh, but there might not be a marking.
It's there. You know? No, it's there. It's just you might not be able to see it. You
might not see the marking that's not there on them. At that point, you don't have a criteria. So it's like, then you might as well just be like, it's a witch.
Right. Which is why you can't give these courts, it's like, oh, I'd like to give them some credit for having these rules, but they're fucking arbitrary anyway. But
there's probably some real witch hunter back then who was like, actually had a criteria, and that meant that he never killed any witches. Because he was like, nope, that doesn't prove anything at all. And he's probably just watching this guy like, he's a fucker. He's just making up the rules. Destroying the sacred profession of witch hunting.
I guarantee that there was witch hunters back then that would argue with each other about the like scientific absolutes of witchism.
Yeah. Just like how like there are Bigfoot hunters today who are like, one will say something and the other one will be like, they don't throw rocks, you're stupid. It's like, right. They're not real.
So, to a layman, an invisible devil's mark would be impossible to detect. But to a man of science, such as the Witchfinder General, this was merely an inconvenience. Because you see, devil's marks do not bleed. Except for when they do, because witch law also states that witches' familiars, or their pets, drink from blood from the witch's mark, just like babies drink from a breast. So, again, the stuff that I read, and I didn't dig into, like, witchism and witch lore back then, it contradicts itself, like, in the same fucking sentence. It's like, oh, a witch's mark, you can cut it and it won't bleed. And that's where the familiars drink the blood of the witch. It's like, what?
Unless you're thirsty.
Right. So you could simply find them by cutting a woman's arms and legs with a blunt knife in various places to see if they would indeed bleed. And if that failed to find a mark, that's when the designated witch prickers would step in, using sharp sewing implements to prick various parts of the body, looking for a place that wouldn't bleed. And remember, these methods are science and definitely not torture.
Right.
Because torture is illegal.
I was going to say, this isn't torture. We're just trying to gather all the facts here. Holy shit.
And it's funny because I don't have any medical training, and I know that there's parts on my body that I can poke and even break the skin and it won't really bleed, because that's just how bodies work.
Because blood flows through the body through a system, so not every area of the body is at like fucking max capacity of blood.
Right. So armed with such convincing methodology and his skill in court, some historians theorize that Hopkins actually had training as an attorney before he began hunting witches, although there's no like actual evidence, there's no like paper trail of that. Matthew Hopkins, Witchfinder General, convicted and had executed as many as 300 women between 1644 and 1646.
For profit. He did it as a business, man.
Yes. So the total estimated number of witch executions in England during the 15th through 17th century, so 3 centuries, that Hopkins was not a part of is 200. Meaning in 2 years, he killed 1.5 times the number of people that the rest of the entire country did in 300 years.
Fucking whoa.
Yeah. If the Witchfinder General's office in London was a really real thing, and if it had a Hall of Fame, he'd definitely be in it. But fortunately, not everybody in England in the 1640s was a rabid moron, and his activities were drawing a lot of attention from actual lawmen. Unfortunately, as mentioned at the start, the courts were pretty tied up with like all the wars going on. And so by the time the official inquiry began in 1647, the Witchfinder General and his buddy Stern had officially retired.
Oh,
shortly.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess
crap, we
leave him
can't
to
convict him
it.
now. He's done. Well, shortly after that, Hopkins died of tuberculosis. So,
Son of a bitch. God damn it.
right.
Fucking dumbass time with fucking dumbass people.
It's frustrating because he didn't get to face justice, but it's probably not, because knowing what we know about history, he probably would have never faced justice.
Yeah.
Like they would have
even that is like, what do they do? Fucking hang him? It's like that.
Yeah.
That's not gonna fucking solve the hundreds of people he murdered. I just like, there's something especially shitty about there's something shitty about being evil enough to kill that many people when you're doing it through a clear business model. Like, that's such a fucking disgusting. Oh, fuck that dude. Fuck him.
I guess the only good part about that is tuberculosis is a really shitty way to die. So at least a little bit of Schadenfreude there.
I don't know. I played Red Dead 2. It seemed fine.
But like all good stories that we tell on this show anyway, this one can't end on such a warm, fuzzy note. So during, as him not facing justice. So during this crusade against women who definitely were not witches, he penned a book called The Discovery of Witches, which chronicled his adventures as a witchfinder general, but also like chronicled his methods on witch detection. And this would be the work you cited in future, definitely not murder frenzies, such as New England's first witch hunts, which ran from about the time of Hopkins' death in 1648 and continued through 1663. As well as this was one of the big things that was cited and used in the Salem witch trials in Massachusetts.
He wrote the book titled like how I fought the devil and built up my financial portfolio.
Yeah. So who knows how many deaths like that he wasn't directly tied to, but was tied to because his book convinced others that, hey, this is how you hunt witches. Let's kill them all.
Yeah. And you know, we're like, people are dumb enough to be like, look how many witches they took out back then. Like, they were successful.
He's here. There's probably a statue to him somewhere, but
is there just like, I would like just one town that was just like, yeah, he killed one woman and nothing got like better.
Like, we want our money back. I didn't look up what happened to Stern, his associate. Like,
I mean, I think going down in history as a witch pricker, probably. He got his in the long run.
Yeah, he never actually went by that during his like course of the work. That was his sentence passed upon him. You shall henceforth forever be known as witch pricker.
Everyone who passes by you shall snicker and call you a witch pricker.
So that's the story. That's Matthew Hopkins, Witchfinder General.
Yeah. That's a great topic. That fucking sucks shit, though. Like, which is, you know.
Well, that's
which means it's an A+ for our show.
I was a little surprised I hadn't heard about it. Not that I like the smartest like history person, obviously, and not that I've like ever done like extensive like witch history, like looked into that.
But like the most like notable figures in like witch hunting chapters of history are always like, their stories are really bare bones. So like to have somebody who is like built his fucking life around hunting witches and had a methodology for it and a scam behind it is like. And
then on top of that, just like the sheer like horribleness of the numbers, because like we said, you look at something, the Salem witch trials has been like one of the things we look back on in the like 300 years almost since it's happened. Well, a little over. as like one of our like darkest, most embarrassing points in human history, because we allowed ourselves to get into a frenzy and kill 19 innocent people. And it's like, oh, he did that on a Friday.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, fuck him, man.
But great title.
I love, yeah. I respect the hustle, but God, I wish he got like ripped apart by a bear or something. Yeah. So yeah, take that mood into Thanksgiving.
Next week, Principal Leprechaun Ambassador Steve will be back for another puck.
Yeah, we haven't really talked about it. Are we?
Yeah, next week we'll probably not be back for another podcast because our recording day falls squarely on Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Although maybe we'll find a time to record around it. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's usually a pretty busy week, but
yeah,
we're heroes.
Yeah, we'll see what happens, but if there's not a show next week, we'll be back the week after.
Yeah, don't let it break your hearts. I know you'll miss us, but
yeah, there's
we're
plenty,
not going anywhere.
There are plenty more Witchmaster General Extraordinaires out there that we can.
It's really amazing how many of these things you can come across. Like, don't do it. Don't go looking for them because it's hard enough for us to find them.
We're at a point now where we will literally type who's the worst into the Google search bar. It just gives us something new.
Yeah. I'm laughing because I've literally searched that. Be like, most evil person in history.
Who is just the fucking most terrible person right now?
And that's what I mean. Then you can't even do that. That sounds like an easy thing to do, but then you get those list articles that it's like, oh, it's an interesting list, but there's not enough information on any one person to tell a full story.
Yeah,
'cause it's like, oh, this guy burnt down an orphanage. You're like, great, but I can't make 30 minutes out of that.
That's anyway. All right. Minutes should carry over. We got 40 out of this one, so that's 10 for next week. We only need to do 20. But no, we'll be back. Like I said,
eventually, at some point. Yeah.
At some point, if we're not back, well, whatever. Have a good Thanksgiving. Bye. Go away. I don't like being on the spot.
He's a witch.
If he doesn't like talking, he's a witch.